Welcome to episode 180 of the Highly Relevant Podcast, where we explore how Latino pop culture is reshaping mainstream entertainment. I'm your host, Jack Rico. In today's episode, why are Latino holiday movies so rare? Venezuelan-American director Angel Gracia joins the show to discuss his new Christmas movie, How the Gringo Stole Christmas, starring George Lopez. In this candid conversation, Angel and I explore the challenges Latino films face in appealing to general audiences, the realities of casting Latino roles authentically, and the hard business truths of making art in Hollywood. But first, here's a recap on the latest news in Latino pop culture in a segment I like to call Jacked In. Let's begin with the top movie, TV, music news of the week. DC's Blue Beetle, starring Xolo Maridueña, is streaming on Max now. John Leguizamo asks for artists to boycott Univision for cozying up to Donald Trump. Afro-Latino actor Colman Domingo's new civil rights movie, Rustin, is now playing on Netflix. Creed 4 is in the works with Michael B. Jordan directing again. Amazon's Gato Grande Studios options for television Ana Reyes' psychological thriller novel, The House in the Pines. And Mexican-American comedian Ralph Barboza embarks on an 18-city U.S. tour called The Super Cool Ass Tour, starting January 12th. And in tech and social media news, Instagram has added 25 new filters for editing photos and videos. Spotify plans to leave Uruguay over changes to copyright laws. Apple is reportedly planning to release its Vision Pro headset March 2024. WhatsApp will soon have an integrated AI chatbot. 43% of Americans say they are turning to TikTok for news. And advertisers are asking X's CEO to step down. Director Angel Gracia has been directing for a long time. From high-end commercials to music videos with Madonna and feature films like From Prada to Nada that blend cultural flair with mainstream appeal. Angel's latest film, How the Gringo Stole Christmas, stars George Lopez as a Chicano father who is skeptical when his only daughter brings home a white boyfriend to meet the family over the Christmas holidays.
I'm sure your dad's gonna love you bringing home a gringo boyfriend.
Everyone knew his daughter loved her new man a lot.
My dad loves surprises.
I hate surprises. Try to stay sober this year.
Feliz Navidad!
But not everyone knew.
I have a surprise for you. Mom, Dad, this is my boyfriend.
Your boyfriend.
Hoy como va, Senor Sanchez?
Poppy did not.
Family meeting in the Mexican home right now.
Angel and I sit down to discuss how his journey of being a perpetual tourist in many countries have shaped his approach to storytelling. He also opens up about the unwritten rules of casting and financing a film, and he also shares his ambitious vision of how he is planning to reshape Hollywood by bringing it to Texas. Angel, how did growing outside of Venezuela and adapting to new cultures impact your personal and professional life?
I was lucky enough to be able to live in Venezuela when it was easier. My parents were well off enough to be able to do that. And so we went from Venezuela to Miami, which is the natural migratory routes for Latin America. And that allowed me to sort of wake up to the world where I am not the boss, I'm not the majority, I'm now the minority in this place where there's people where you cannot figure out who's who from where. So that was the first mental losing virginity of the me. No, it's them and everybody else. So it helped as a melting pot of realization, and you begin to learn. And then I migrated to other parts of the US and Europe. And then you again, the foreigner, you again, that guy. They make fun of your accent and your other ways, right? And so in a way, I have yet to find a place where I'm supposed to belong, and I'm happy being a gypsy everywhere I go. And I'll continue to be a tourist for the rest of my life.
Angel, and how does that, what you just said, how does that feed into your directing, into the stories that you choose? How does that shape your storytelling?
A good story should be universal, but the nuances of the story are brought in by the characters and their experience. So you can write that into just about any script, right? You could have made this movie about Chinese Americans, about Italian Americans, about anything, right? It's a fish out of water. It's universal. And have experienced that in Germany. I've experienced that in England. I've experienced in different places where I have lived. So what I try to do is, it is a comedy. It needs to be broad enough and wide enough to be enjoyed by anybody, but it has a Latin theme on it, very strong. So I want to make sure I not only do justice to it, but I actually sharpen it and get as much out of it as I can. And this is what I call cultural confusion. Humor comes in. Let's highlight the differences that makes us want to reject each other, embrace it, and make fun of it. And hopefully that'll make you aware how silly it is that we keep trying to fight each other for no good reason. Just because you sound different or look different or like a different food.
Is this a reverse look at how white has always treated Latino characters? How are we reacting to these types of characters pit against each other on an ethnic or racial level?
I was very conscious of trying to do the reverse, as you call it, to see what it looks like if George Lopez, of all people, is judging the white boy by the color of the skin, right? Is that what you taught me, Dad? And we're not supposed to be those people. And that actually wasn't originally in the script. Michael Mendelsohn, the American producer who financed the film, after we'd done a reading with all the actors of the script from beginning to end, called me up and he says, "That was great. Couple of things." And one of them was, does it sound a little too one-sided? Always the brown versus the white boy, daca, 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 daca. And I was like, oh my God, yeah, you're right. We don't mean to do that. So I actually wrote in a line for Emily Tosta to throw back at George's character, where he kind of magnifies that point. Because from my perspective, I've experienced the rejection everywhere. When I lived in Germany, it's the Germans, for some reason, it's a big migration of Turkish people to Germany. I would used to joke that those are the Mexicans in Germany, right? They get seen in that way. You look that way. You make too much noise when you party.
Every country has it, like Brazilians in Portugal, same thing.
Every country. In Venezuela, we rejected anybody that came with another accent. I've had that in Spain. I've had that in England. I've had everywhere. And when I think about it, it might be that's innate in humans as animals that we are to reject the enemy, which is anybody that might look like it belongs to another herd and might come and take our stuff. So I think there's an innate desire to do that. But obviously, if you don't see it coming, you don't identify it as the potential enemy. So what's actually interesting is that the closer we're together, the more we reject each other. So if you're in Germany, you're not rejecting the Mexicans, you're rejecting the Turks because they're the ones across the street. If you're in, I don't know, in Italy and you're Roman, the guys from Milan come in and you go, those guys. If you're in Milan, they make fun of the Romans. If you're in Spain, the Catalans don't like the guys from Madrid. The Castilians don't like the ones from...
The Paisas and the Rolos de Bogotá have a beef with the Curramberos de Barranquilla.
If you think about it, the closer we are together, we can see, smell each other, hear each other, and find quickly your arepa doesn't taste like my arepa. You put sugar in your arepa, that's illegal. Bah, we have a reason to fight, and now social media, it can amplify that, and then you can sell t-shirts. So this particular movie for me is, okay, let's just make sure that we see how silly this is without preaching, because it still needs to be a comedy and it's a Christmas holiday movie. But I will not just do that unless, especially if I have George Lopez, which is a great social commentary comedian, without latching onto it and making a point. And with respect, because I also don't want Jack Kilmer's character playing the white guy to just be the token white guy being the victim just for fun, right? So I want him to be smart. So that was actually my biggest challenge. I want to make sure this guy's not just the idiot that happened to land at the wrong time in the wrong place.
Let's talk about the cast for a second. I've never seen George in a holiday film of this type. What was it about the script? Was it difficult to get George?
You know, George is a man of few words, believe it or not. So when he does his thing, then he goes home. And so you don't get to find out really what he's thinking outside of the job that you're doing, right? Being a Chicano, born and raised in East LA, comedian who happens to have a daughter of a similar age as this character, identified himself with the whole thing and thought he could do justice to the role and have fun with it, which he did. So once he is sent to the agent, sent to him, he says, yes, let's meet. You always have to have a meeting, make sure, he needs to scan me like the Terminator, make sure, right? But when a veteran like him, he does that in about 2 minutes, right? The call right away, we know what's up. And he said to me, I remember, my daughter came home, not for Christmas necessarily, but one day with the white boyfriend. And so I can totally identify with this thing. And obviously, I cannot think of a better person to play that role. That guy is the best comedian in that area and happens to be born and raised there. And so he's the writer. They're Chicanos, born and raised in East LA. So they're speaking from experience, comedy, but also the pain, because there's some moments where you can tell George is bringing on some truth from his early struggles in life.
Now, let's talk about your actress, Emily Tosta.
Yeah.
So she's Dominican, but she plays a Mexican daughter. There's been just so much talk within the Latino media community about what makes a Hispanic, what makes a Latino. And there's been so much talk about whether a particular race should play another race. And this has mostly applied to either blacks or whites. And now that we're looking at Latinos, I just want to get your take as a director. Should an actor that has a native heritage, let's say the Dominican Republic, allowed to play a Mexican? Because you could make the argument that Mexicans are going, well, listen, man, it's a Mexican role. It's a U.S. Mexican role, and there's a whole state full of them. Why not get a Mexican woman to play that role? Do you disagree with this? Do you agree with it? And how do you think it impacts the way we cast people today?
Casting is very difficult because it not only has to do with what's right for the story and the script and the character, but also what can get financed. At the end of the day, unless you rob a bank, which, by the way, when I was a student, I was at a film festival in Miami and I met John Waters and I asked him innocently, how do you get a movie financed? And he told me, and I remember as if it was yesterday, rob a bank or steal from your grandmother. So either you're rich and you have the money to make the film your way and no way, and then hopefully it sells and people see it, or you have to comply with a bunch of difficult things, which is who can sell the movie. So there's an unwritten rule of what actors are worth what for what type of movie, and it changes every quarter each year. And the studios know this. And I don't know why it's not talked about more. I guess because it's somewhat embarrassing. But I've literally had exactly this guy who I work with, Dan, wants to do this. Oh no, that guy no longer means anything because he did too many back-to-back last year on this. And all of a sudden, there's like a price tag of value put on actors that moves up and down depending on the film festivals where films are sold. So that is from Cannes to American Film Market, Toronto, and everywhere in between. So you have like about probably 12 of these things, 12 months out of the year, where sales agents go in with their movies. They occupy rooms, they put banners, they have press kit and PDF decks that show you that movie, and you read it and you might like, I'm looking for a comedy, I'm looking for a drama, I'm looking for a thriller, I'm looking for another Bruce Willis movie, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then that's how you attract the potential investors, potential distribution, and sometimes a combination, which is the most difficult thing to do. How do you get this package with these actors to be financed by pre-sales, where, with what distribution, where or where not? It is it would be like a film course in and of itself, just to understand that, for filmmakers to know that before we get into this thing. And I thought I knew it, and as I get into each movie, I know more. So there is that. So that's the politics and the reality of that, unless you rob a bank or steal from your grandma. That's John Water recommended, which I'm going to try one day. Or you got to play the game. Now, within that, you want to do justice to the role. And oftentimes you go, why is that guy playing that role? Why is Zeta Jones playing a Mexican? Right? And then you go, oh, that makes no sense. So I think it's not black and white. There's shades of gray, right? From an Anglo to play Hispanic, it's a little harder than from one of us Hispanics to play the other one, right? So Mexican playing a Cuban or a Cuban playing a Mexican is easier than an Irish person playing a Mexican. So I think that it's not black and white. And obviously, if I don't have a Mexican Chicano born in East LA actor like George Lopez, if he turned me down, I almost got no choices left. So there's certain things you want to try. Obviously, I will not attempt to put Banderas to play Chicano. So it was important that a guy like George is not only a writer and a comedian, but he's that guy who can draw from the banter and the way we speak, which is full of nuances that are specific to that culture. Now, Emily is a great actress. She's very funny. She can fluctuate her accent from Dominican, Venezuelan, or Mexican, because the nuances in those accents and that culture are not as a big a gap as they might be between, let's say, I don't know, a Scottish person and an Australian, which might be a little bit longer gap. We're talking about phonetics, how you can represent and interpret something. For me, Emily is close enough to that experience of the Latina-Americana in this country, living in Los Angeles, familiarized enough with the culture, but she's playing a more universal American Latina bandwidth than George, who's playing a more specific Chicano. So he needs to improvise more and draw more from that experience than Emily, who is actually playing a slightly more broad American Latina. She doesn't need to have that improvisational slang that is unique to Chicano, for example, right? And she's also playing the adult in the room, because the movie has a lot of reverses in it. So the two younger ones are playing the adults. That's Jack, Kilmer, and Emily. With them, I improvise in a different way. You're the adults. You're putting your dad in his place. Right? George, you are the kid. You're going to go there. Right? And so that's a very long way of answering your question, but it's just nuanced to where I think you need to do justice to it while you keep in mind the business that you're in, and hopefully you can make it work or die in the attempt, which is often what happens and you don't hear about.
But Angel, how are you supposed to maintain the authenticity of a story where so many critics, fans are constantly asking for that purity that we search for in these escapist stories? We want them to match our personality. We want them to be from where we are. We want them to have the lived-in experiences, and how having that in a character is no longer enough. We need to have the actor exude or inhabit that lived-in experience into the character as well. So what do you do for authenticity then when so much of the business and the politics is integrated within the business of Hollywood?
Well, I mean, I am certainly not a Chicano, and I hadn't been to East LA until after I shot From Prada to Nada, and I had to go and shoot the establishing shots. So here I am making a movie about that, which I actually didn't know, so I had to do research. I shoot TV commercials. I often don't know what this product is about, or I'm going to a country where I'm representing a culture for that particular product with a whole social study, what that looks like, that I have to fulfill. So it's a bunch of advisors. It's a bunch of people saying, no, you can't say this, you can't wear that. And this type of person wouldn't do that or say that, Angel. If I limit myself to the only thing I understand and know, I'll be out of a job. Now, what is the beauty of it is because I do consider myself just a human occupying the planet. What's interesting is to be a tourist in every experience and learning. So when I go everywhere, I want to learn about it, whether it's New York, East LA, Istanbul, or, Thailand or Shanghai or Vietnam, all the places where I've actually gone and worked and had to assimilate the culture. To me, this is part of the experience. Now, obviously, then they got to cast those roles and you want to do justice to it. But in all of those, there is a business model, and the business model is telling you this client needs this, needs that. Don't do that. Don't go there. If it's just a movie for myself, I got to finance it for myself, bring just my friends and just do the one thing. And then it might never get seen. So you got to know how to read between the lines. But I do think that if you just wanted 100% to be authentic, you're talking a documentary. This is a comedy. So as much as I want to have a social commentary, I'm making a comedy to laugh. And then I'm trying to be as truthful as I can to the culture. But because it's a means to an end, it's a comedy. And sometimes Lopez will say stuff and I go, what did you just say? And I'm shooting the other actors. I turn the camera to him. You say that again? He said it off camera. And so a role, a character is not just a culture. It's a bunch of other stuff. What she brings to that role, as you see in the movie, is fun, smart, grounded, young adult in the room, sweet, stern. There's so much to that person outside of where was she born, right? Where was she born by mistake? Oh, I was born in one place, so I'm born in this place, and now I'm living in this place.
So, Angel, I had read an article from February of earlier this year where you were discussing development plans for your own studio called Super Studios in Mansfield. And I kind of wanted to get a sort of an update from you on where that's at, because from what I was reading, much of what you had said is like, look, California and Hollywood, that's a geographic place, but with the demographics changing, with the culture changing, the politics changing, maybe California isn't where Hollywood should be. But you're proposing that Texas is the new Hollywood.
So building a studio is harder than making a movie, which is hard enough. And you have to convince a lot of people, starting with the city, because you have to start making a movie. You got to have the distributor, the tax rebates, the sales benefits, and And then you got to get investors to jump in. And the studio is no guarantee. You cannot sell pre-leases because basically a studio exists. And then when shows need it, they go and rent your stages. I tried from Los Angeles at a place in Santa Clarita to different places in Texas, because Texas was opening up, finally increasing the tax rebates. So you cannot open a studio in a place that doesn't have tax incentives and tax rebates. That's like making a movie in a place where they give you nothing back. It just doesn't work that way. So if you go to Atlanta, you have 30% tax rebate. In Texas, it's up to 22.5%. You want to know your cap is also not limited to X amount. So as those things begin to increase in a place like Texas, where there is no sound stages of the sort, which is the biggest type of sound stages, right? Big film studio, it's a business opportunity. But it's very challenging because it hasn't been done yet. And I don't particularly have that experience. But when the project was mentioned to me by a neighbor, almost randomly, and I looked into it, as I'm always like every other filmmaker, if they're not lying, is always trying to find a way to finance their next projects. I didn't realize as a user of the studios, what a great business that is if you build the big ones with TV series. And so it took me a few months to understand the business from that point of view. Because I was a user of stages, but never the business guy, right? And when I realized how much money you can make of a sandbag that gets sold for the next 10 years, and every chair and every paperclip and every light and everything that's in this thing, but it's a great business model. It could be a restaurant, it could be anything else. But because I know something about movies, so I brought in a couple of consultants to understand what we could do. And this started like 5 years ago. Just hitting walls and learning, hitting walls, learning. Until we found the city of Mansfield in Texas. Here, the tax benefits, the rebate incentives, all that stuff, plus the logistics. Where is this thing? What are the weather conditions? How close is the airport? How close is downtown and other locations? So we got a place that's about half an hour away from DFW, one of the biggest airports in the country, half hour away from downtown Dallas, half hour away from Dallas-Fort Worth downtown. In Hollywood, you got nothing half hour away except 7-Eleven. So to be able to have a studio, when you jump on the highway, within half an hour, you have all these variables in a relatively good weather condition most of the year. But if you compare that to other places, it's not that bad. So just by elimination and business thinking, and after going through 4 different cities around the Dallas area and Fort Worth and pitching it to different cities, and we had everybody wanting to do it, but the configuration in Mansfield was the right one to sign on with the city. And this was nearly a year ago. After you go through that process, which is like pre-sales accounts and all that, you still need to finance it and cast a movie. So now we finally signed on with Urban America, which is a big developer, minority owned. So here we are, a minority owned bunch, a motley crew of right, coming into Texas of all places to a kind of a purple area, because Dallas Fort Worth is kind of really neither red nor blue. And the status is that right now we're about to start the race. That means that we finally got all the elements that took a year to put together to start going. And the reason we were able to do it is because it's not just a studio, but a city. It's a mini city around it. It has hotels, it has restaurants, it will have a trade school. And the trade school will do what I wish I had when I was young. So a passion project within this thing. So there's the making money for the studio so I can make my movies. But then there's a trade school, which is a passion project where if I can train you in 6 months to be ready to get a PA job in one of the shows at the studio, that's what I wish I had, because that's the best way in the business. Rather than spending 4 years and $400,000 to become a director that you'll never will be, and then you wake up 10 years later like I did. Let me make you a PA in camera if you're good for camera. Let me make you a PA in art if you're good drawing or building things. I may make you a PA, you know what I mean? That's how you get in.
Angel, thank you so much for being on the Highly Relevant podcast. How the Gringo Stole Christmas will be in theaters, on demand, and on digital on December 1st. Angel, muchas gracias.
Merry Christmas.
Before I wrap up here are 3 Latin tracks you might want to add to your playlist this weekend.
Yo sé que para volver ya es tarde y nuestro plan nunca fue quedarse. No sé si habrá una segunda parte, pero si algo nos quedó es todo lo que pasó en Mónaco.
Mónaco, Lagos featuring Danny Ocean.
En Mónaco.
Por esa cinturita fue que yo caí, la vi bailando bien solita y un trago yo le di.
Cinturita, Reggie el Auténtico.
Así, con esa cinturita.
Yacer Tejeda, Pa' Sembrar. And that's it for episode 180 of the Highly Relevant Podcast. A special thanks to Angel Gracia for joining us. And if you enjoyed this episode, please tell a friend, have them subscribe, and leave a review. You can also connect with me at Jack Rico on Instagram, Threads, and YouTube. I'm Jack Rico. See you next week on another episode of Highly Relevant.